All right, everybody, welcome to the Sober by Design podcast. I am back recording and very excited. Tonight, I have a great guest to come back with after a bit of a break for my one, tech issues, but two, a little bit of mental sanity. So tonight, I welcome Alex Talbot. Alex is a person in long term recovery, comedian, founder of Sober Active Canada, which I want to talk a little bit down the road in this episode, and a national level competitive bodybuilder, which I think is amazing. So, welcome, Alex.
Thank you so much for having me on, and what an honor and a privilege it is to be your first guest back after hiatus. And thank you so much for sharing your platform with me tonight.
Yeah, no, it's really, listen, I love having people on who are into their fitness and, in long term recovery, kind of blending a bunch of different things to help them. So, this is the type of guest that I really think brings a lot to the listeners. And you seem like somebody who's going to be easy to talk to on the re-entry to podcasting over after a 4 month break. So, how I normally was doing this beforehand, and I do kind of like the format because I think it gives people a good background on the guest. Is I ask people where they grew up and how they grew up. It's just it is a kind of a look back into what could have been the start of issues for us, right? Our early childhood shapes us for sure. What do they say? It's like 0 to 7 is kind of where you're formed. It could even be younger.
Yeah.
So, if you could give us a little background story, that'd be great.
Well, I love that you're actually hitting on that, because the further along I get in my recovery journey, obviously, the drugs and alcohol were never the problem. They had just become asymptomatic to my dis-ease, and I put a hyphen mark in dis-ease. I have a dis-ease of self. I'm not comfortable of, within, by, and with myself, right? Um, And if I go all the way back to early childhood, obviously, the belief systems, what was instilled in me and ingrained in me from a very, very young age, those character defenses, my behavioral patterns, my thinking from a very, very young age, I always say I was an addict and an alcoholic long before I was an addict and an alcoholic, because admittedly so, it took me 28 years to make that revelation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to admit it to myself. And greatest revelation of all time was an admonition to myself at the age of 38. I always get into the fact too, I started drugging and drinking at the young age of 10. Where along that line, and to trust, I was having the time of my life back then, but where along that fine line, it went from, recreational use and having the time of my life and reserved for special occasions and the parties on the weekends, and that, like, the regular teenagehood. I grew up in the big city. I was born in Montreal, raised in Toronto. I am Canadian. Um, so, but a big city kid, right? So that kind of stuff's normal, right? And but where along that fine line, and I got to tell you, it was fast, it was insidious, it was quick, it was ugly, it was, like we say in the traditional rooms, cunning, baffling, powerful. It took over, and where along that fine line, it went from recreational use to daily habitual abuse, but probably very, very early on. Again, I was an addict and an alcoholic long before I was an addict and an alcoholic. I always like looking at it too from the perspective of like recovery being that return to an aligned, harmonious, balanced state of self, right? I look at recovery as a transformative process, not what program you're working, what program you're not. I could care less. If it's working for you, keep working it. All pathways are absolutely viable today. And it's such a beautiful thing that there are so many different options and flavors for everybody out there,
Right,
right?
right.
But when I start going back again to the, we are born, when we're newborns in this world, we are born divine whole beings. But, the things that are instilled with us, our environments, our circumstances, our parents who are our role models. So I do, God bless his soul. My father never was able to find this better way of living for himself
Mm-hmm.
or his family, So it runs in my DNA,
Mm-hmm.
My father was an alcoholic and an addict. And that came with it. I've been able to identify my daddy abandonment issues in these last 8 years in recovery.
Mm-hmm.
That would have led me, that would have actually led me to my codependency, my love and emotional and sex addictions from a very, very young age, because I was always seeking that male. He was very absent father, very, not present in my life. Um, that would have led me from a very, very young age to seek that male figure,
Mm.
that older male figure, and that older male role model in my life. And clearly, I found it in all the wrong places. So, again, when I go back to me being the young age of 10, I was hanging out with older men, 20 years old, a 20-year-old and a 10-year-old have absolutely nothing in common.
No.
Absolutely nothing in common. And so that led to other, obviously childhood sexual trauma and childhood trauma and what have you, and all those underlying issues, and I always go into it too. Today, again, if I'm returning to an aligned, balanced, harmonious state of self, if I'm looking at recovery as a transformative process, all those fragmented parts within me, the traumas, the things, the voids within myself that I'm trying to fill, what I'm trying to run away from, like everything that makes me who I am today, right? Because
Hmm.
again, I was born as a whole divine being. So trying to find that realignment within myself. So again, my daddy abandonment issues. I am a woman of mixed origin. So for that right there too, I was able to identify, embarking on my recovery journey. Don't think it was the first thing I thought of on day one, on April 22nd, 2017, far from, but I was able to identify my identity crisis from a very, very young age, not feeling black enough for the black or white enough for the white,
Hmm.
abhorrent racism in my maternal family. My grandfather didn't even go to my mom and my dad's wedding when they got married in the late 70s because she was marrying a black man.
Hmm.
He absolutely loved his grandchildren. Nothing negated that fact. However, that didn't stop him from the racial slurs in front of me or from me not feeling like I even fit in my own family, right?
Hmm.
So I guess, you could say that the alcohol and drugs and that false sense of belonging that I thought I found, a sense of appartenance, being part of, I always say addiction doesn't discriminate, right? It doesn't care what side of the tracks you're from, what shape, size, form, color you are, what your religious views are, what your political beliefs are. It is absolutely an equal opportunity destroyer, but neither do the people you're drugging and drinking with, right? You only have one thing and one thing in common only, right?
Yeah.
So I found that entourage from a very young age. And I got to tell you, like, it had just become my daily norm. It had become my very lifestyle. And I like flipping it to today, like where recovery is absolutely my life, my style.
Right.
It's my lifestyle today.
Right.
But it had just become what I did. It was so regularized. It was so normalized. It had become my very identity by the end. And I always say, like we say in recovery, we find ourselves. How could I find something I never lost? I never knew who I was outside of that world,
Right.
right? Like I started drugging and drinking at the young age of 10.
Yeah.
Right? I never knew. It was my very identity. It's what I prided and glorified myself on by the very end. I could out drink you, out snort you, out party you, out fuck you,
Yeah.
like you name it. I could outdo you in those areas of life.
Right. And how did that
But
like
can you
work?
even call that a life at all, right? And
It,
then like, that's what I was competing against everybody, like against everybody for. Like you could stay up for 5 days, watch me go. I'll stay up for six.
right.
Like,
I, I
wow,
got a
what a waste of time.
I got a question, like, cause it sounds like your dad was maybe not around at that early age, right? And I
Mhm,
don't know where your mom was. You're
mhm,
10, um, and you have this group of older people who you're hanging around with.
yeah.
And I'm just thinking about like my kid. I have a 13-year-old. I have a 19-year-old too, but I'm thinking about my 13-year-old more, right? Because I'm trying to like in my head wrap around what a 10-year-old would be like. Um, how are you functioning in like school? How are you going about your
Okay,
days?
so that's what's very funny. Like that's, and you know, I I was so academically successful and so professionally successful from a very young age.
Mm,
So that kind of stuff, the money hungry, the power hungry, the rank and file. So I was I actually fast tracked high school.
Okay.
So I always lived this dual life, right? By day, academically successful or professional Alex. By night, running the streets.
Mm.
But at some point, that dual life obviously collided and became one, right?
Mhm.
And I always even used this, like I was a high-ranking public service employee in the government of Canada for years, and got in, got my university. I went to university at the age of 17,
Wow.
got my degree in mass communications at the age of 20, and I was off to the races. The federal government hired me right off the bat, and I didn't go entry level. I went in middle. I was a middle manager at the age of 20. Like my employees were in their 30s.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So just that, and then I was going to be the youngest executive, the youngest deputy minister, the youngest this, the youngest that, and they were investing in me, investing in my professional like my professional leadership development and my personal leadership development. Like I was a whiz kid,
Mhm.
but all that went to my head. That really went to my head, and everything was below me and everyone was beneath me for a very, very, very long time, and we'll get into that, like the dis-ease also of
Sure.
perception, and that kept me in my denial for so very long,
Yeah.
you know um but uh but yeah, like let's get back to, so obviously raised by a single mother
Mhm.
who killed herself to provide for us, worked 3 jobs, 7 days a week, of which one was a flight attendant.
Mm.
So she wasn't home very often, and I completely took advantage of that. And when I say, if I go back to the beginning of time, and I was an addict and an alcoholic long before I was an addict and an alcoholic, when I start looking at my beliefs and my behavioral patterns and my way of thinking and my actions as a very young child, I'll even go into it and look at, like, I was manipulating, I was thieving, cheating, like all those things from a very young age,
Yeah.
because I always wanted to fit in. And I'll go into, like, even my from a very young age now, like identifying my running shoe addiction, right? I'm a sneaker junkie, and I still am to this day, except buy sneakers, don't buy crack,
Sure.
um but like I remember my mother being sitting there and being like, Alexandra, I'm so sorry, but like we're gonna have to wait till my next paycheck in 2 weeks to buy you those running shoes. I can't buy them for you tonight. And I knew how I had her wrapped around my little finger.
Mm.
I could sit there and cry in her face for 2 hours until she caved, because Alexandra was going to get those damn sneakers on her feet that night, because in 2 weeks' time they were going to be out of style, or everybody was going to have them. So I was not going to longer be the cool kid in town,
Yeah.
right? And I would sit there and cry in her face until she caved and brought me to that damn mall that night to buy me those sneakers when she didn't even have the money for them, right?
Yeah.
And just my like from a very young age. And I always said I was such an ungrateful little bitch, like I truly was. My mother, like I almost lost my mother I was 12 years old. I almost lost her back then to breast cancer. Modern medicine and advanced science was just not there yet.
Mhm.
This is like in the early 90s. And she, I almost lost my mother. And it's funny because she always said, we could laugh about it today. She always said, and that's exactly how I treated her still. She's basically dying, undergoing chemotherapy and radiation at the same time. Heavy, heavy treatment back then. And and she always said, I'm the only white mother that has 2 black children, and I'm the only white slave to 2 black children,
Mm.
you know? And that's exactly how I treated her.
Ah.
She was my slave, you know?
Yeah.
And and today I just can't even, my mother, my angel today, completely recognize it. I'll forever be living in amends whereby she's concerned, and forever living in amends whereby my own daughter's concerned, and how you were saying about your son. That was one of my, in that moment. And I got to say, on April 22nd, 2017, in my room that day, as I was trying to go to sleep, I got woke, right?
Mhm.
Something within me just, I flipped the script. That life I once lived, And that woman I once was completely ceased to exist in that moment. And unbeknownst to me, and I swear to God, this was a split second decision. I would change the entire course of my life. But one of the things that was going through my mind at that point in time as a single mother, first of all, my daughter was going to be 10 years old in a couple of months time. From, her birthday's in August.
Hmm.
This was April 22nd, 2017. So in a few months time, my daughter was finally going to be 10 years old. And unfortunately, and I'll forever be living in a lens whereby she's concerned as well, because she grew up her first 10 years of life
Hmm.
with a mother in the full throes of active addiction and acute alcoholism, right? But that's what went through my mind. Who am I to tell her any differently? She's going to be 10 in 2 year in a few months time.
Right.
And I started living this way at that age. Who am I to tell her any differently? I am not the woman I'm raising, and I am not a parent.
Mm.
And in fact, as her sole provider, like, this is not fair to you, but this is definitely not fair to her. She wasn't asked to be born into this lifestyle. She wasn't actually asked, she didn't ask to be born into this life,
Right. Right.
right? And this is what you're giving her?
Yeah.
Like, this is not normal.
So that was 2017. So I'm trying to think back a little bit for myself here because I think my older son when I got sober, he was probably about 7, I think, right around then.
Hmm.
So not exactly as old, but long enough in that, and he can remember it for sure. Like he'll say, "Oh, I remember." Parts
Right.
and pieces of
And
that.
didn't you think that you were doing such a good job
I did.
hiding
I did. I
everything?
did. Well, towards the end, I didn't. But it's just interesting because I myself said I would never do that, and then I did it.
Mhm.
And shame on me, but I don't know that how much control we have over it. At a
No.
certain point, it just kind of is. To your point, you're kind of things happen and they form who you are, and you
Hmm.
you start down that path. You started at 10, I started at 18. I don't know that
Hmm.
it matters much, right? It still does a ton of
No, it doesn't.
devastating things no matter when you start. But the good thing is, I will say, and probably for your daughter and I think my son, is that when we stop, we are able to be there fully. And while they can remember parts of it, they see you working hard to change it. So
Change it.
that's really the
Exactly.
important part, I think.
And that was one of my big things, right? Like, it's time for you to step up to the plate and to be a role model,
Yeah.
you know? To be a role model. Who are you to tell her any, like, you need to start walking the walk and talking the talk in this world, woman.
Hmm.
Right? That's really what I was telling myself, and it's such a beautiful thing to see our relationship. We always had a tight relationship,
Yeah.
Um, I owe her my life, like, she uh, I was, I was telling you, I was just babysitting a girlfriend of mine's children this weekend, and I was realizing it, like, my daughter was never really that age, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
She was taking care of mom at like the age of 7. She was babysitting everybody else's kids while we're all in the dining room partying,
Hmm.
at that young age.
Yeah.
I'm like, she's definitely wiser beyond her years today for it, right? Yeah, so as much as we had such a tight bond then, I got to tell you, like, coming into recovery and the life I live today, I always say addiction is a family dis-ease,
Yeah.
recovery is a family affair, and she's quite involved. And the ripple effects of my recovery definitely impact not only my daughter, my mother, my partner, all my loved ones around me today,
Sure.
and that's a beautiful thing about it. And moving away from those, I'm trying to change my language and thinking around certain things. But, like, when we start talking about, like, obviously I was able to break the generational curse,
Hmm.
right? And that cycle that had been going on in my family. But, like, moving away from the intergenerational trauma and moving towards intergenerational healing,
Yeah.
right? And I find that such a beautiful thing today.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
listen, I feel the same way, and I really do hope that the work that I've done, and and
Hmm.
I think this is what you're getting at, is like I hope the work that I've done to show, hey, if I put in the effort, if I do the right thing, good things happen.
Happen, yeah.
Um, and that's kind of what I just try to model for my kids and others around me.
Yeah.
I, the one issue I always have with it is like I always say parenting is so hard because you don't know. Like it's such a
Yes.
long game, right? Like you think you're doing
Mhm.
good, but are you sure? And like
Yeah.
you get little signs, I think. And overall, I'm sure you get those same signs where you're like, okay, I'm on the right track.
Yeah.
And that's all that you can hope for, right? Is that
Yeah, that's
you
all you could hope for, and I just got to keep on leading by example,
yeah.
right? And showing it in my actions and behaviors and reactions and emotions and thinking today, right? And
Mm-hmm.
my approaches moving forward. The past is the past. I unfortunately can't change it.
Mm-hmm.
And our pasts our histories are the blueprints to our future, right? I love this, sober by design, right?
Yeah.
Design for better living,
Yeah.
and redesigning or recreating or reinventing myself from the inside out, from the ground up, and the ripple effects that that has, especially on my daughter. But children are going to be children as well, and that's an important lesson I've learned in recovery, is that we all have, including our children, we all have our right to our own beliefs, to our own way of doing things, to our successes, failures, and
Mm-hmm.
experiences, right? So, I can't stop her from being a child either. And I can't stop her from doing the things she's going to do and from learning her lessons, right? On her own.
Yeah.
And I find it huge, right? Like the other day I was actually talking about this with a group of my friends, right? Um, because she is going to be 18 in August this year, and in Quebec, where she lives, where I currently live out west
Mm-hmm.
in Western Canada, and she stayed in Quebec in my condo over there. And and 18 is the legal drinking age in Quebec, so of course she's talking about her 18th birthday and having a drink or two.
Mm-hmm.
But she's a normie,
Right. Right.
or put air quotes, whatever you want to. But she's not an alcoholic drinker.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been able to, and that's what I find another beautiful thing is that I have all these, solutions and tools and everything today to actually sit down with her, because during the pandemic, and I won't get into it, but like, our children's mental health definitely struggled, but to be
Sure.
able to be a present parent, I would not have been able to deal with that the way I did had I still been using. But to be able to step into a solution, to step into action, to actually be a fully present parent and be able to help her overcome her own struggles,
Mm-hmm.
such a beautiful thing. So we actually have those tough discussions together today. We're able to communicate about those things. We're able to ensure, that it's not being used to fill voids within herself, or to express underexpressed areas of herself, or to mask the pain, or to numb out, or to escape from reality, or like, teenagers and children are still going to be teenagers and children,
Right.
right?
Right.
I can't come in there overbearing and smothering and, you know,
Yeah. It's I always say being a good parent is hard, right? Being anybody can like parent, I guess.
it's the hardest job I've ever had.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean like you really have to work and you have to again lead by example, you have to make hard decisions, you have to have those hard conversations. And then I think something that happens for people who are in recovery, you do get those tools that you were talking about
Yeah.
that I wish some people just had. Like even if you weren't didn't have a substance abuse issue, a lot of what you learn in the 12 step or going to
Yeah.
therapy or any of these things is really helpful in dealing with your kids. I know my parents didn't have any of that to help me. Um, my mom got it
You-
later in life, ish. And then, but it's been so helpful to have that as a tool, like to be able to say, okay, this helped me. So maybe if
Yeah.
you're struggling with this problem or that problem, but yeah, watching your kid maybe make a mistake. For me, I really do worry about sort of regulating that inside emotion with outside things. I do see that.
Yeah.
I see that in some behaviors, and that's what worries me. But you just sit back and you kind of say, "Hey, this is what happened in our family." That's kind of what I say.
Mhm.
Like this, here's all these examples, and maybe tone that down a little bit, right? Like maybe
Yeah.
maybe we don't
Yeah.
need all those sneakers, right? Because I have that too. My younger son has that as well, right? Like,
Oh yeah, my daughter too loves
yeah.
her Jordans.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like maybe we don't need another pair, right? We don't
Yeah.
feel that it's not helping us feel any better. But
Yeah.
there's so many things that we pick up that help us parent in this recovery lifestyle that I really wish we could just kind of like put out to other people because I see other parents struggling, and it's not that they could be having a substance abuse issue. I don't know. They could just be normies. But
Hmm.
like I see them struggling, and it's like, man, if you
Yeah.
just knew these one or two things, it'd be so helpful for you. But
Yeah.
can't help everybody.
No,
No,
exactly, exactly. And you can't either help those who don't want the help, right?
right,
Like,
right.
and that's what I say about my own recovery, like I had, recovery is not for those who need it because I clearly needed it 28 years before I found it,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
It's not for those who want it because I truly did want it for quite some time, by the end there, it was between, every 2-minute interval between a rail and a swig of whiskey. Like it was like, okay, this is the last one,
Hmm.
but it never was. And why April 22nd, 2017, out of all days, couldn't be a more random date on the calendar?
Hmm.
Why that day out of all days? It was just finally my time, right? Due and divine timing. And I will say that it was divine intervention because the things that led up to that point, the amount of, my wake up calls and my rock bottoms, and apparently there's more bottoms on the door bottoms, and no matter how far down the scale we've gone, the deep depths of despair, like what, Alex could have been more knee deep in our own shit, right?
Hmm.
But like, and that's the thing, right? And what just like near homelessness with my daughter. Meanwhile, here I am, strategic advisor to a deputy head. So I guess in the States, that would be, a commissioner to one of your federal
Yep.
departments. So the top bureaucrat, right? Stealing from the public coffer,
Yeah.
using taxpayer funds to fund my habits by the end, having absolutely nothing to show for the career that I had. Meanwhile, ruining my career and not realizing it. I was slowly and silently ruining and killing myself on every level, and whether that be mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, right down to financial and professional. I ruined, and I was killing myself. Like
Yeah.
I wasn't. I was too blind to see or too and stuck in that cycle because as soon as I'd come down and I taste 2 minutes of reality and have to face my obligations and my responsibilities again, like I couldn't feel those feelings, that shame, guilt, remorse, regret, you name it. I can't feel that way. The only way not to feel those feels is to check right back out, right?
Yeah.
And so the cycle continued.
Those are
And like,
big
I was in
ones.
near homelessness with my daughter, getting into again more toxic and abusive relationships. And then finally, like the weekend before, I was given the gift of desperation, finally, in one final act of desperation. Because my dealers were no longer coming to my house or telling me to get off the streets. So when your dealers have cause for concern for you, then you do definitely have a fucking problem.
Yeah.
And I went and picked up off of somebody across town who I had no clue who he was, never saw him before in my life. But I could tell you whatever I put up my nose that day was definitely not, you know, cocaine,
Hmm.
because I had been doing that for a good, latter part of 28 years, you know. And I thought the only way to get down from that high that day was to take my own life,
Mm.
you know? And apparently, there's always been a higher power with me for me to even be here to live to tell the tale, apparently. So, and, but it still took me one more week after that, you know? So it was just my time finally on April 22nd, 2017. But I could tell you what, I was willing to go to any means and any lengths necessary to embark on this recovery journey. However, had you told me when I went into the rooms of recovery, to the traditional rooms of recovery that day, that you were going to launch me and propel me into a, a healing journey, a self discovery journey, a self improvement journey, a transformation journey. Again, I want to focus on that because, again, recovery is absolutely a transformative process for me, right? Real transformation requires real honesty. From that moment forward, that's when my transformation journey, mind, body, and soul began. But had you told me that that's what I was going to be doing and that I was going to have to delve and dig deep within, and unpeel those layers and the complexities of myself and figure out the whys underneath the whys of why I was behaving the way I was and what was making me sick and what makes me tick today and you know why I thought the way I did. Why had you told me I was going to have to face myself and do some inner work, which
Hmm.
I absolutely love today. I love doing inner work and my work's never done. But had you told me that, I would have ran right out those rooms.
Yeah.
You know, I was lit again. I thought my only problem was the drinking and drugging, right? And then every other addiction that I have, right? Um, but like I really truly thought I was just going in there to put a plug in the jug and stop picking up and using on April 22nd, 2017.
Yeah. It's it's kind of just the start always, right? Like I went
But
to
it's just the beginning.
yeah, I went
Putting
to
down the drink and it's just the beginning.
yeah, I went in on I don't- when I went into a room and I thought, well, this is going to help me and that was kind of all I knew, but then, over time that whole journey's changed and I think you said it right, like it's transformation. So for me, it's been a lot of different things over time and it's never somebody said, why do you say you're in recovery? Are you ever going to be recovered? And this is a longtime friend of mine and I said no because like for me each day I can get a little bit better. I don't know how much better every day, but I can get better than I was yesterday, right? So for me recovery is like this long sort of extended string that I don't know that there's an end of it. And um while maybe I'm not going to be better tomorrow, I'm going to at least try today, right? Like
Yeah,
learn something, do something.
exactly.
And so for me it's like I'm not recovered, just it's just
Exactly, and I debate that terminology, and it's like I'm a notorious and hardcore 12-stepper. Everybody knows that, and I'm in various fellowships, but I always come back to the original manuscript and the original, the original manuscript of any 12-step fellowship, the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and those are not. And I go back to even the first edition of the Big Book. Those are not suggested steps; those are the directions to my life today. That is my design for better living. It's a template. It's my blueprint. I got to populate it in order for it to work for me on a daily basis, right? But it's really funny because I will debate that. I cannot stand in the big book how it refers to recovered.
hmm
Okay, I understand the recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body.
hmm
That I do understand. But for me, recovery is a transformative process. I will forever be recovering. I will not fully be recovered, right? It's a daily, ongoing, lifelong, God willing, I'm in this shit for the long haul.
yeah.
It's absolutely a process for me, right? And again, like I was telling you before we jumped on, if I look at the word recovery in the dictionary by definition, it actually means to return to health and wellness after suffering, injury, or illness,
hmm
right? That's its very definition. So it's not what program you're working or what program you're not. Whatever pathway you're on, beautiful, keep working it, if it's working for you. Um, for me too, like, so I say, right, abstinence is but one component. It's really about improving my health and wellness, thereby improving my quality of life. People will often ask me why my handle on Instagram on my personal page is healthy XXL,
hmm
because what my real journey is one towards healthy living life large, right?
Sure.
If you're telling me I have a mental obsession, a physical compulsion, and a spiritual malady, right? Which I do. I have a three-pronged dis-ease again. I put the hyphen mark between it. I have a dis-ease of self. But if I have a mental obsession, a physical compulsion, and a spiritual malady, I have to attack those three on a daily basis. And all the 12 steps give me is my spiritual program of action. So you best believe I better have a mental program of action
hmm
and a physical program of action as well, right? My daily reprieve is not only contingent upon my spiritual maintenance, it's as equally contingent upon my mental and physical maintenance day in and day out.
Yeah.
So I work a trifecta program. You know, fitness and nutrition have proven viable approaches to my recovery, complemented by my 12 steps. However, those 12 spiritual principles that I practice in all my affairs across all facets of my life, and it's not about working the steps for me, it's not about doing the steps. I could talk steps all day long and I could talk big book all day
Mm-hmm.
long. It's about living the steps, right? That's page 83 of the big book, right before we get into the 9 step promises. The spiritual life is not a theory, it has to be lived,
Mm-hmm.
right? The recovery life is not a theory, it has to be lived. Recovery is a lifestyle. As much as drugging and drinking had become my very lifestyle, I've been able to convert that on the flip and make recovery my lifestyle. People will be like, Alex, you're so intense with your approach to things. Go, I'm an addict. Once an addict, always an addict, right? I'm either one extreme or the other, all in or nothing at all, right? There's no in between. There's no moderation. There's no middle ground for me. Like it's either one end or the other end of the spectrum for me. But like, I'm just chasing my recovery like I used to chase that next fix, that next high, and that next drunk. And trust me, that was by any means and any lengths necessary.
Yeah.
So I'm willing to do whatever it takes today. Again, recovery for those who are willing to do whatever it takes, right? If I want something badly enough for myself, best believe I'll do whatever it takes to attain it, right?
Yeah. But I would say, I know you again, I would say parasocially through Instagram, right? So I,
Hmm.
I follow you. And I would say if people say you're intense on recovery, I would say, well, I don't know. Like you are, obviously, but you do things outside of that, right? So that's what's interesting to me always. Like there's the recovery part, right? So like traditional recovery. So,
Yeah.
uh, if you had told me before I found my recovery and got sober, my mom was in AA, and I thought yeah, and I think I've said it on here, so I'll say it again. But there were moments during when her sobriety period, which was long, before she passed, that I would question like, is she better off now than she was when she was drinking? Because she was so focused on just AA, like there was
Hmm.
nothing beyond that idea, right? So it was
Yeah.
it was only that, and to me, that is just could be just as bad. Where
Hmm.
I think you've again gotten this three-prong approach where you have your program, then you
Hmm.
have your mental, and then you have the physical. And when I
Hmm.
when I think of you, I think, oh, that's somebody who's really into health and fitness and doing something
Hmm.
like really good for themselves. So, you know,
So
yeah. So
again, I
how did
come
you get
back to it
there?
though, right?
Yeah,
Recovery not being what program you're
right.
working or what program you're not,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Recovery again being a transformative process for me. But I'll tell you what, so that's what I was trying to get into as well before. Those 12 spiritual principles that I'm supposed to practice in all my affairs and apply across all facets of my life, which I absolutely do, are the foundational building blocks for everything I do today. For how I do one thing is how I do everything.
Mm,
So people will often ask me, is your is bodybuilding integral to your recovery? It's intrinsic. It's one and the same,
mm,
right? When I start looking at those 12 spiritual principles, right? Honesty, faith, courage, hope, discipline, integrity, all those, self love, and as opposed to love, or like compassion, being compassion, like all those are displayed onto myself as well, right? So that body, and the fact that I'm a natural bodybuilder, there's a reason why I'm a natural of 100% natty bodybuilder,
yeah.
is that integrity piece, that honesty piece, and that discipline piece with myself, right? Um, so my entire life does revolve. My lifestyle is recovery, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean, yes, for myself, again, like I said, right? That 12-step modality works for me. But
Mm,
I'm also a certified health and lifestyle coach that only works with recovering alcoholics and addicts to help them achieve their optimal health and wellness goals, because as much as I'm addicted to bettering myself today, I'm addicted to helping other people better themselves. Again, right? Recovery not being what program you're working or what program you're not.
Yeah.
So let's move away from that. 12-step recovery doesn't work for everybody. Although it's pretty funny if I talk to my friends who are not in 12-step recovery and refuse to label themselves as addicts and alcohol, call yourselves whatever you want.
Yeah.
I don't care, but it's funny. I'll always have discussions that get into these deep discussions with them, because everybody in my life today, unless you're family, everybody is either a God-centered 12-step fellow such as myself, or on some kind of pathway to betterment or recovery,
Yeah.
right? I don't associate, I surround myself with winners, right? Like with like-mindeds,
Hmm.
right? So it's really funny because sometimes I'll be talking to some of my friends that own other nonprofits or whatever, and they're living the sober living lifestyle, which is super cool, by the way. I think like people just doing it for the health benefits today, and like there's so much research done on it now, and the stigmas are starting to be smashed. The narrative is starting to change on this, and I just think sober life is the best life, everyone. But like I'll talk to them and I'm like, you just like literally told me you 12 stepped yourself without 12 stepping yourself, right? Like, I mean, those 12 spiritual principles are broadly universal,
Yes.
right? Even in the introduction, in the forward, in the 12 and 12, it starts talking about non-alcoholics
Hmm.
have even embraced this design for better living and these 12 spiritual principles, and have praised, like there's a universality about it.
Yeah.
They're so broadly applicable. And look, if you look at that first step, it is the only step out of all 12 steps that has the DOC in it, or the issue, or insert whatever you want there. For Alex, I have a dis-ease that centers in my mind, right?
Hmm.
The greatest battle I'll ever fight is the one up here. If I'm not of clear and sound mind, whether that come in the form of a bottle, so alcohol, whether it come in the form of a rail of cocaine, whether it come in the form of a mind mood altering substance, whether it come in the form of sex, porn, you name it,
Yeah.
that's the only step that has the issue or the substance in it, right? The other 11 steps are about building a relationship to self, to a higher power, and to the world around me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. They are great tools, and I will say also, about a year ago, I started attending the Unity Church, and the
Mm-hmm.
founders of the Unity Church actually crossed over with the founders of AA, and they use a lot of similar language, and they have their 12 principles, and it is very interesting when you start to kind of see the interweaving of it all, because it is. And unity isn't really as like dogmatic as maybe some of the
Mm-hmm.
other Christian religions are. That's kind of what attracted me to it. And actually, my younger son wanted to go so he could wear cross earrings. That's what kind of brought us to church. I said, you can't wear a cross earring if you've never been in a church. So we started going, and the crossover between the two is really interesting. And again, it's just another good, good ways to live, right? Live an honest life and do the next right thing kind of idea. And that's attractive to me now
Yeah.
in my current state. And
And I had been looking for some time, for that next because Alex likes chasing the next level as well,
mhm.
and once an addict, always an addict. Now I'm just addicted to trying to get to that next level after that next level after that next level. And that's why competitive bodybuilding absolutely bodes well for this addict brain, that's for sure. And yeah, like the last couple of years in my recovery, I've been like, there's something missing, and I've been doing that research and the linkages between Christianity and the 12 steps, and then like going back to the Oxford group, and the 6-step program, and solely faith-based, and then the extra additions in the 12 steps, and that bit about like one alcoholic or one addict helping another,
Mhm.
and the altruism bit, but there's levels to this, and I liked how you I think you were alluding to it a bit earlier, when we first started our discussion, and like addiction is never rational,
Mhm.
recovery is not linear, right? There's levels to this shit, and like I was telling you, like recently, I was really questioning And I almost didn't celebrate my 8 years. Like I had almost rewound the time on that because I had really been questioning, had I really been clean and sober of all mood and mind altering substances these last 8 years? Because I was still very much living in a lie, especially these last 8 years as a certified health and lifestyle coach, somebody who's now studying to become an elite personal trainer, a national level bodybuilder, a prominent figure in the sober active movement, promoting, you know, health. A healthy self is to heal thyself, and
Mm-hmm.
promoting physical activity and proper nutrition and ridding ourselves of all toxicity. I had still been smoking. And although I wasn't explicitly lying about it, I was lying about it by omission, which is still a lie. So for me, it wasn't only, 'cause I'll tell you what, that is definitely a mood and mind altering substance because those first 72 hours of being like 100% nicotine free 100 days ago, I never want to go back to those 72 hours again because I was an emotional mess.
Yeah.
The emotionality and the roller coaster I was on from 1 minute crying over nothing to the next minute wanting to go and blow somebody's head off outside like that was not that was just not. I never want to feel that way again. But that started making me really realize like that is definitely the first drug I picked up and the last one I put down. And it wasn't so much in a sense because I don't call my, April 22nd 2017 for me, I don't call it my clean date. I don't call it my dry date. I don't call it my sober date. It's absolutely my rebirth date. I don't even look like the same woman I looked like 8 years ago.
Yeah.
So for me, when I come back to that step one again around this, right, around my nicotine use, it was more questioning, have I really been reborn? Because the unmanageability for me came in the form of the incongruency and unalignment I had with these spiritual principles that I uphold to the nth degree, particularly my honesty, my integrity, and my discipline. But I was not in honesty. I was not in integrity. And I was definitely not disciplined
Mm-hmm.
around it. And, but I was finally told, and I couldn't have found another better, again, Alex, right? Once an addict, always an addict. One 12-step fellowship too many, a few thousand, never enough for Alex. She's in them all. But, I was able to find a very, and she complements my other sponsors so well, but a very God-centered, God-driven woman,
Mm-hmm.
and she made me realize like this is just my next level awakening. This is just my next level that I've been chasing for, to now go again and gain that deeper understanding of his knowledge for me and the power to carry that out. Like this is that next level I've been longing for. And she couldn't be somebody because she was like, Alex, like you sponsor so many women and so many different other fellowships. Like, why me?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, you are the one that I need. Like you were brought into my life. Just the way you speak, the way and we've been starting to do that inner work again
Mm-hmm.
formally, and like because for Alex too, how thorough is really thorough? Have I really been thorough? Again, addicted to bettering myself, right? Like you were saying.
Yeah. It's a good way to be. Um, I always worry about it. Maybe taking it too far. I don't. I mean, I've kind of been a little bit lax. But I do. Yeah, I know anything can be taken too far. That's the issue, right?
Mhm.
I always think about anything, right? Like even when I eat sugar, it's like, why,
Yeah.
why am I doing this? It's just, and then I get like in my head, it's like, but it's just a candy bar, but then I eat like five of them, and it's like, am I eating five because they taste good, or am I eating five because I feel bad and I'm trying to fix that? Like, I can really go make myself crazy
Yeah. Go crazy.
yeah, if I think too much, right? And it's like coffee. I love coffee. I'd probably drink way too much coffee. Am I doing
Hmm.
that because I like coffee, or am I doing that because like I need the caffeine? And
Yeah.
so like I have to make a stop at some point. But I do want to talk about fitness because I try. I am nowhere near your level, but I did get into CrossFit, and I was
I love it.
I was coaching kids sports, and that was a big part of my recovery, right? Like you said, there's
Hmm.
all these things that add to your recovery. So for me,
Yeah.
the coaching was like accountability, it was the community, it was all these, and it was
Hmm.
service, it was all of these nice things wrapped into coaching. And you know, I was not athletic enough to really be a coach. So then I had to go do something. And so I started CrossFit after my mom passed, and I had like a long year, and I was like, I gotta do something. So I got into CrossFit, and on and off. It was pretty hard on for like 2 years. Then I took a break during COVID because it just was difficult to go in and out of the gym. We did get some equipment at home, and but
Hmm.
now for the past year and like 3 months, I've been going pretty hard. What one great thing that came out of it is like I've gotten my health back. And so fitness is really important, and I know you feel strong about that. But the other thing that came out of it is like my older son got really into his fitness through it. So now he
Hmm.
goes to CrossFit, but he also goes to he calls it his bodybuilding gym, and he's very into like probably a lot of the same things you are. He's always like, I'm going to do a natural show. And, he's like,
I love it.
he's like,
How old is he?
he's 19. So,
Oh,
he's like,
is he thinking of like doing junior or like?
he'll say he's kind of cursed with my genetics. I'm not a very large person, so
It comes down to performance, anyways.
yeah. But he goes all the time, and he's really into it. So like we've gotten
Hmm.
him into it. My younger son, he's not really into that as much, but he has his passions, right? So again, I think it's more than anything building a passion in something that's like good
Hmm.
for you, that brings you esteem, and put something out positive out into the world. And you've obviously been doing that through your bodybuilding, but then also the formation of your sober active. So
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit more about both? And did they come out of each other, or did they, one
So
sort of start first? How did this all happen?
I gotta tell you, so as a result of my behaviors and the way I did things and the way I operated, how I was saying, I had led a dual life for so very long, but where along, that line as well, that dual life became one. So apparently everything catches up to you, and luckily enough, I was 3 weeks into my recovery journey. I had already been in the rooms for 3 weeks. I got summoned into my big boss's office, and I thought I was going that pink cloud that you're on at the beginning, right? And I was 3 weeks in, I was already healed.
Yep.
I was good. I had no more gash under my nose. I didn't reek like liquor anymore. I was showing up to work again. I was high performer, no pun intended, but like a high
Yeah.
performer again. Reactive, proactive, like on the ball and alert. I was doing great. 3 weeks in, nobody's gonna know anything that happened over these last like years, right? Um, and I got summoned into my big boss's office, and I thought I was going in there to talk about my future staffing action plans. I had my org charts all underneath my arm going in there, and I actually made the joke. It's not every day I get summoned into the big boss's office, and within 15 minutes I was being escorted out of the building.
Jeez.
Okay. So everything catches up to you, people. Apparently, when you're working for a deputy minister, you don't steal from the public coffer and use taxpayer funds to fund your habits, especially if you can't pay back your government travel card either that you had been using to travel to the ATM machine for cash advances and to travel to the liquor store, right? You just don't do that. No, I don't recommend it.
Yeah.
um you know but so yeah, so in that moment I really, as I was being escorted out of the building, don't think with that severance package I didn't think of like, oh, I'm only 3 weeks clean and sober, I could go get loaded right now.
Yeah.
Holy shit, I'd have the time of my life. But I don't know what came over me, but because that thought did cross my mind, by the way.
Hmm.
But I took it as a blessing in disguise, and for the first time in 18 years, because at that point I was 18 years. I had 18 years of pensionable service at that point. So I was in beginning career. I was in end career. I was smack dab mid career at that
Hmm.
time, and I took that as a blessing in disguise. And it was the first time in 18 years that I was going to be able to work on myself and make it a full time job. So day in and day out, that's when I started working on my mind, my body, and my soul, right? And doing the mental exercise, the spiritual exercise, and the physical exercise. And I had read John C. Maxwell's quote very early on. at that probably that 3 week juncture as well. You know, change something you do daily, change your life. Your success lies in your daily routine.
Hmm.
And that's when structure and routine became everything to me. Ritualizing my morning. And I really like FM Alexander's quote these days too, right? We don't decide our futures, we decide our habits, and our habits decide our futures, right? So there started my spiritual practices, my physical practices. And don't forget, up until that point, my daily routine was drinking, drugging, working, right?
Hmm.
So I completely overhauled my daily routine. And that launched me into a whole other world because when I came into the rooms, I was a 250-pound woman.
Okay.
I was definitely represented a culmination of 28 years of substance abuse. Somebody who lacked complete self respect for herself. Therefore, she didn't demand it or command it in turn, nor give it in turn. A complete disregard for her health and her wellness, therefore, and her safety and security and that of her daughters, and stripped of any dignity I may have ever had in my life.
Mm.
By the very end, I couldn't even take care of myself, right down to basic hygiene.
Yeah.
Um, so for me, and don't think, it didn't happen overnight, people. I didn't wake up the next morning and I was like, okay, I'm a day sober, 250 pounds. I didn't even know what the competitive bodybuilding was.
Right.
I started, and I couldn't even do 2 minutes of cardio. I was so unhealthy on every level, and malnourished, right? People would be like, you were such a cokehead. How are you so fat? And I was like, honestly, there's such thing as coke bloat, and after a certain period of time, it actually has, the powder diet actually has, and like my body was just, I mean, like it did not have that effect on me anymore, right?
Yeah.
And I was so malnourished because for every, 5 days that I'd be on a bender, then it was time to like come maybe 2 hours, maybe I should replenish with food a little bit and take a little nap so I could start all over again. But in those 2 hours, just like everything else I was putting in my body that was toxic, I could eat 5 pizzas to myself, have 6 Pepsis and 2 bag of chips. And for those of you who know what Quebec's famous for, la poutine, right? Like cheese curds, gravies, and fries. And I could have like 6 of those in that span of 2 hours. No shit, I was a waste case. Like everything I put in my body, right? Today, as a health and lifestyle coach and practitioner, diet is so much more than what we eat. It's who we surround ourselves with, what we watch, what we read, what we're listening to. It's everything we're consuming, everything we're feeding our mind, our body, and our soul,
Hmm.
right? Everything I was putting in myself was junk, right? So I was so malnourished too, and those are my words to live by still to this day.
Hmm.
Change something you do daily, change your life. Your success lies in your daily routine. And then I had lost my job, and then because of my own personal transformation, so I started by doing yoga, and that really helped with obviously the mind body soul connection, my breath connection, going and connecting, because I found a group of like-minded women who were going in. I had taken the fact that I lived in Gatineau Park in Quebec for I didn't even know it was in my own backyard, because the only thing Alex ever wanted to do when she went into the like hills or the mountains was to go get high and drunk.
Mm.
That's all I was going camping for. But to be able to start connecting to self, to higher power, to nature, to community, right? The opposite of addiction is connection. Like, and final and recognizing that my breath, my mind, and my body and soul are at interplay with each other, and the synergies between them, right? That's when I started looking at my trifecta program, right? Nutrition being as equally important on my mental health as it was on my physical health, good physical health promoting good mental health, and vice versa,
Hmm.
right? And yeah, and then of course I was out of a job, so I was looking, what else was Alex gonna do? But because of my own personal transformation at the time, I was like, I want to bring this. I think this is my calling, and then I went and got, and noticing the psychology, everything begins and ends in our mind, right? Again, like I told you, I have a dis-ease that centers in my mind, And I really like in Canada how we were like dubbing it now mental health and addictions, right? Because to me, I might not be clinically diagnosed with any mental health disorder or, depression or anxiety or what have you, you know, but I was addiction is a mental health issue in and of itself,
Mm-hmm.
right? So again, when I come back to it, everything beginning and ending in the mind, even my own blind faith or a belief in a power greater than me, that's all up here. It's between my two ears, right? So once I started learning how to conquer this, right, the sky is not the limit. Our minds are,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that's how I started getting into the realm of fitness, and and I think too, like I really start using it as um, how I say, I just like, like physical activity, and it doesn't have to be, and I try not to use for me, I love the word exercise, right? It's very results driven. Of course, I'm also trying to drive results, but that's all predetermined for me today. So I like also have a concept when I go on stage, like how I do one thing is how I do everything, right? My higher power already knows what's going to happen on stage on October 11th.
Mm-hmm.
So between now and then, I just need to keep doing all the things, and the next right thing's bound to happen, right? So that's how I approach that too. So I'm not so focused on outcomes and results anymore. Although at the beginning I was, because as an addict, like I have a need for instant gratification. So I had actually connected with Carly Young Fit on here
Mm-hmm.
as a sober sister first and foremost on Instagram, because I came onto Instagram about 30 days in 8 years ago, before there was this big huge sober, like now the community's pretty big on Instagram. The
Yeah.
online recovery community's huge. But we were a small pocket of us back
Yeah.
then. But I had bumped into her, and I just absolutely loved her because she was kind of a role model and a positive influence in my life. And a business owner, a gym owner, particularly. I had just finished my health and lifestyle coaching certification, so that was kind of interesting me and getting into my own practice. And having this woman, and she actually had a competition team, and she's the one that approached me with it about, it's funny because I came into the rooms on April 17th, 2017 at 250 pounds. And a short year later, I was stepping on stage and I actually had to bulk up for my first competition. But again, let's talk about it, right? I have a dis-ease that centers in my mind. And if I'm not of clear and sound mind, I'll take anything and take it there.
Mm-hmm.
And people were starting to get worried about me because in that first, I lost 100 pounds in a little more in the span of 4 months. Why? Because I took it there. There is such a thing as orthorexia, so my disordered eating. I had an unhealthy obsession with healthy eating.
Yeah.
I took it there. So bodybuilding actually helped me wrap my head around that, because I actually had to start drinking like an isolate shake in the morning, and oh my god, you're making me put that's processed. Oh my god, I can't put that shit in my body. But it started wrapping my head around that, and that's why I had retired, last year from bodybuilding as well. It had started becoming all consuming,
Sure.
but I also, come to a year later, that loss of sense of self and direction in my life, it's who I am. It's a part of me now, right?
Yeah.
So again, returning to that aligned, balanced, harmonious state of self. And I have to really keep myself in check. And I loved how you said that, because there have been a couple of points in the last 8 years where Alex is a little intense, but where she's been losing herself and everybody else's recovery, or trying to help everybody else, or being so addicted, um, doing all the things for everybody else at the detriment of her own personal recovery. So that's where I go in today, where our blessings cannot become our curses. And I have to be of service to myself first before I could be of service to anybody else. So there have been those points where I've had to take a huge step back and reassess the people, places, and things in my life, because it always comes down to the people, places, and things in my life, and detach with love of that and those which no longer serve me, right? For who I align myself with, or what and who I align myself with and attune myself to, are the direct lines into my future today, right?
Yeah.
That too, or even just, I don't know about you, but I know when I first got into the rooms, after a couple of years, like my daughter even said, like, I thought you got clean and sober to spend more time with me, but I wasn't having that quality time with her, even in recovery,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
because I
that's
was so in the meetings, the this, the that. There is such thing as recovery, a burnout, people.
yeah, I mean that was one of the big things that kept me out of the rooms at the start. I think I mentioned my mom, and she got sober when I was 18. I started drinking when I was 18. Just
Hmm.
coincidental. I mean, it was just sort of just happened that way, right? But she was really into it, and I thought, well, this isn't good. I don't want to go there to fix this problem because she's not around, and then I won't be around for my family. So what, that place is going to suck me in. Like
Yeah,
that's what I saw out of it. And so I when I went into it, I was very I was like regimented about how I used the rooms, and it was like
yeah.
I went at lunchtime, so I didn't eat lunch for a year and a half. Um, I just went at lunch. I did my meetings. I had cookies and coffee. Again, not
Coffee,
healthy, but
the
like that.
donuts.
It was like, but in my head, what I had on the back end of that was time with my wife and my kids, right? So I was still getting the tools I needed, and I wasn't taking time away. So it was this way of sort of prioritizing myself, but prioritizing my family.
Hmm.
Um, and ever since then, I've always kind of tried to balance that out. I think it's important to not dive too
Yeah,
far one way or the other. I wanted to step back from one moment though, because you talked about cutting people, places, and things out, and the cutting people out and things, whatever you want to call it. It's just so hard, but people is the hardest.
yeah,
And, you know, I've done it over the years, and I think more recently we've been doing it around our house, and doing it, I think with love as much as you can. Cut somebody out with love, right? It's just a hard thing to do, but it is a really important thing to think about as you navigate your life. And some people will hold on to sort of damaged people maybe that are bringing them down, and in like minor ways, right? Like things you don't even think about can really just take you down to like another level, right? It's
hmm,
like that person's not that bad, but then once they're out of your life, you're like, wow, I feel so much better. So it's the hardest, one of the hardest things to do is cut people
yeah.
out.
I always say, I find it so funny that we have such a hard time with the concept of impermanence, right? The only constants in our lives are ourselves,
Right.
right?
Right.
Everything and everyone comes and goes,
Yeah.
right? But I always go into too, like our discernment game and our detachment game got to be strong, right? Our self love game got to be stronger than our desire to be loved.
Yes. Yes.
Right. So whether it's putting up those boundaries, whether it's,
Yeah.
protecting our, living in our truths and protecting our integrity, living in our truth and our integrity. That's what boundaries are doing. The difference between boundaries and putting a guard up, right?
Yeah.
But our boundaries are protecting our truths and our integrity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so important in recovery, right?
Very important.
Um, so yeah, so I'll always go into that. And for me, the goal is not to be clean and or sober, but it's to love ourselves enough to come to those places of self-love
Yeah.
where, we can live lives unaddicted,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Well, we have been talking for a while, and I have enjoyed every minute of it. I think you have so much to offer. We could probably talk for like another hour and a half if that was available to, but it's too long for
Mhm.
anybody. But what I did want to do is ask you if you wanted to end with a couple things. So I'm trying to remember what I end with. One, how can people find you?
Okay, so social media addiction is a real thing, folks. I limit myself to one outlet and one outlet only. I've never even downloaded TikTok in my life. So proud to say that. So proud to say that, and never made a TikTok either. But so you can only find me on Instagram. I'm only active on Instagram. On my personal handle, Alexi, Alexy Talbot, Talbot underscore healthy XXL. And then on my nonprofit page, which is Sober Active Canada, That's the easier one to remember, and on there you'll find not so much anymore, but there's in the earlier days, there was a lot of informational pieces around nutrition and
Hmm.
physical activity and fitness in general in recovery. Also, I do have my own podcast or my recovery MVP features, I like to call them, showcasing some exemplary Canadians in the mental health addictions and recovery space in our country up here doing some amazing things in the community. And, I like to say, recovery strong from coast to coast to coast, one all star at a time. But also, through locally based and virtual programming. So I will start having my yoga, 12-step recovery. I will start holding public spaces up through Sober Active Canada shortly, and starting to do some programming back there as I endeavor to also, establish Canada's first ever multifunctional recovery-based holistic health, wellness, meeting, and event center up here in Calgary, the recovery capital of Canada.
Nice. And the other thing that I always like to ask a little bit before the final thing is there anything that you're watching or listening to that you would like reading, anything that you would like to recommend in the media world?
Okay, so it's really funny because I'll tell you what, in the last 8 years of recovery, the only literature I've been reading is program
Hmm.
literature. Um, there's one book that I have read, and he's actually going to be coming out, and he's one of my, a lot of my work is very much influenced by Tom Shanahan over at Spiritual Adrenaline. He is on Instagram as well. His book, I read it early on in my recovery. His first book, he is coming out with a new one shortly called Sober Active.
Hmm.
But his first book is now used as a reference guide in my daily health coaching and lifestyle practice. It's Spiritual Adrenaline, a lifestyle plan to nourish and strengthen your recovery. So, again, looking at the three elements, looking at nutrition and fitness in recovery as well,
Okay.
but looking at the mental, spiritual, and physical exercise.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to link both of, I'll link the book. I'll link both of your handles on Instagram. They'll actually be on the cover art as well, so people will be able to
Okay.
see them right on the cover art. But they'll be in the show notes. And then, the last thing really is, and I think this is the most important. I kind of ask everybody, what's like, if you could give like one piece of really like sound short advice to somebody who's just early in this process, like what would it be? Because you hear so many different things, but like what's your one thing that you tell people when they're like first coming in?
I know a lot of people tend to have trouble saying that they can't get to that place of self love. But know if you're even thinking about it, know that if you're even having that discussion with me or somebody else, that is the greatest act of self love right there. Um, I'll always say, too, if you can't believe in yourself right now, know that I believe in you,
Hmm.
that Corey believes in you, that there's a whole community out there that believes in you, you know,
Yeah.
because the moment I finally came to believe in something greater than myself was the exact same moment I finally came to believe in myself. And that simple belief in myself, how far it's brought me to today, right? And, you know, there's so much courage and vulnerability and strength and humility. And trust me, I was there 8 years ago, scared shitless to reach out for the help that I so desperately needed for so long.
Yeah.
And that, in and of itself, was the greatest act of self love that I could have ever given myself, was finally getting that help.
Well, Alex, I really appreciate you coming on. Again, I haven't done this in like 4 months, and I couldn't have asked for a better guest to kind of dip my toe back in. And your story is amazing, and you are obviously full of energy and real passion around recovery, and it comes through. So I hope people got a lot out of this. I know I got a lot out of the discussion. So, again, thank you very much for giving me your time tonight.
And again, truly honored and privileged to chop it up with you tonight and to be your first guest back. And again, I can't, lived experiences are teachers. So whether it be me sharing my lived experience with somebody else or listening into it through somebody else, lived experience is absolutely our teacher. Our past don't define us; they absolutely refine us. So thank you for this platform. Thank you for bringing these stories of redemption and hope to the world.
Yeah.
And thank you for having me on tonight.
Great. Thanks, everybody. And we will see you on the next one.